Hello and welcome once again to the morning bulletin from Blood Red. I'm James Martin and I'm joined by fellow Liverpool.com writer Ben Bocsak. It's the international break, which means that we're all sort of scrapping around for any Liverpool content we can find. We're doing our best to keep you up to date with all of the latest on Liverpool.com, with features, with transfer news and everything else. But today we will be talking international breaks specifically. And how much it means to the Liverpool players, particularly when it's friendlies like England have at the moment. For Liverpool fans, we know that it's potentially not the biggest deal, even when it gets to the more competitive stages. Potentially, the interest is not there as much as it is with other clubs. But for the players specifically, we had a bit of a hint this week, didn't we, Ben? That it's a slightly different ball game. We had Salah and Mane coming up against each other in vital World Cup playoffs, and Klopp actually rested Mane essentially ahead of the international game for Liverpool.
Yeah, I mean, maybe not for England fans, but anywhere else across the world, I still think playing for your country is the game, the part of the game that brings you the most pride and the way you want to succeed the most. I mean, I was telling when Sadio Mane said after winning the African Cup of Nations that was the most important trophy of his career. Having won the Champions League, the Premier League with Liverpool, he still valued that African Cup of Nations trophy above everything else. So for the players involved, maybe not the English players, but everyone else, it's still hugely significant and sometimes even more significant than their club football.
Yeah, and I mean, even among the English players, you get a lot of them who think it's the most important. It's essentially Liverpool fans, and even then, a subsection of Liverpool fans who kind of completely disregard English football. I mean, I can't say I'm particularly excited about England, but then you look at someone like Trent Alexander-Arnold, and I know he pulled out of the squad this time around for an injury of potentially not the most serious degree, but equally, it's clear how much representing his country means to him, isn't it?
I mean, with Mane and Salah, obviously, it's a difference because they're playing in a World Cup qualifier that will decide where they will be playing. Obviously, Trent Alexander-Arnold pulled out of a friendly. I don't know. It might have been different. If it was a World Cup qualifier, you might have tried to be involved. But yeah, everyone wants to play for their country, and everyone wants to play at the World Cup, especially I think because it's just such a huge thing. Even though this one's going to be a bit of a strange year and a strange World Cup, strange host nation for sure. But it's still going to be a memorable one, I'm sure.
Yeah, I mean, by all accounts, Alexander-Arnold was very perturbed when Gareth Southgate dropped him back in, I think, March last year, was it? And he was very keen to make that Euro squad, only for, of course, injury to scupper those plans cruelly. But yeah, you mentioned in terms of players being eager to make the squads for the World Cup, the player that applies to most at the moment in the Liverpool squad is certainly Joe Gomez. There's been talk that he'll want to move in order to get that game time he needs to sort of force his way into Gareth Southgate's plans. Firstly, do you think that that's fair enough from his perspective? And secondly, I suppose, do you think he's maybe left that move too late if that's the plan?
I mean, you just never know. Obviously, the World Cup is in late November. I'm sure squads will be announced around potentially October time. So it does leave him with a very short window if he does move on, or if he does go out on loan, or if he does somehow miraculously find his place in the Liverpool starting 11. It does leave him with a very short window to catch the eye. I don't think Southgate has made a habit of calling players just purely based on form or such a short amount of form. So I don't know. I think it is unlikely now for Gomez to make the squad, especially given the likes of Fikayo Tomori can't even make the team when they're playing week in week out for AC Milan and catching the eye and doing very well.
Yes, I was going to mention Tomori. Bit of an odd situation there. There's a good read on him in The Guardian about his his time with AC Milan and how he was, even when he was just on loan, he was learning Italian. It's just interesting read, completely unrelated to Liverpool, but I enjoyed it, so I thought I'd mention it. But yeah, bizarre that he's not even in the squad when you got the likes of Connor Cody, Tyrone Mings. No disrespect to either of them. Of course, Cody, a Liverpool academy prospect, but yeah, it's hard to see how they're getting in ahead. But that just shows the work that Gomez would have, as well as the existing members of the squad, which he'd have to offset. He's then got, like you say, those kind of second class of players knocking on the door as well. So very, very competitive. I suppose the advantage is that Gomez was in the England setup. He was integrated, whereas Tomori is, I think, had 1-2 caps. Was never really a part of the plan. So if Gomez is playing regular football for a couple of months, maybe it's a case that he can say, well, look, I was in the setup before. I'm playing game time again, like you said I needed. So let me back in. But it does seem like a stretch. But yeah, in terms of other players in the Liverpool squad, there are quite a few who are sort of on the periphery, I suppose. The Brazilian players, to some extent, I mean, you look at them and you think, okay, well, they're some of the best in the world in their positions, particularly Alisson and Fabinho. But even when Firmino was at his peak, he wasn't necessarily the first name on the team sheet for Brazil. And now you've got a very similar problem for Fabinho in the sense that he's not playing week in, week out for them, is he? I mean, no one's playing week in, week out. It's internationals, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, I mean with Fabinho, it's hard because he's coming up against Casemiro. So, there can be a debate about who is the better holding midfielder. I think personally Fabinho is better, but clearly the Brazilian coach doesn't seem to think so. And maybe that's just based on the amount of trophies Casemiro has won, and he's been up there and he's done it for a longer time than Fabinho. With Firmino, I think the only reason he missed out on the squad is because he was injured and he hadn't done enough. But I still think when he is fit, he's as involved as he is in Liverpool. Really, essentially, he's become Brazil's sort of super sub.
Mm. And Alisson has somewhat cemented himself in the last few rounds of internationals. It's a competitive spot to say the least. I mean, the obvious competition is Alisson and Edison. Then there's a keeper from the Brazilian league who the manager seems to be a big fan of. So he gets his fair share of appearances as well. But yeah, he seems to be slowly winning that battle. But it's certainly something that means a lot to the players. And I suppose as fans, that's just something you have to accept. It's something Klopp has certainly accepted. We saw that with the decision to not play Mane. I mean, obviously it would have been different if it had been a league game or a Champions League game. I suppose the fact that it was Nottingham Forest gave Klopp a bit of leeway, but I've never seen anything like that really, where it's essentially a case of I recognise how big this upcoming international game is, so I'm gonna leave my players out. Do you think that was probably a bit of trying to compensate for the much misquoted and misunderstood comments about the small tournament, the little tournament over in Africa, which you made about the African Cup of Nations?
I don't think so. I think it's just purely from a tactical point of view, from sort of like a logical point of view, seeing the thing that they've played a lot of games recently, and just recognizing the fact that they need rest, and it will be in the interest of Liverpool as well to make sure that they don't get injured in these very intense playoff games. So I think Klopp just wanted them to go in there fresh and to not risk anything, and then come back for Watford, which is the early kickoff, still ready and still having that energy to play in that game. So I don't think it was necessary. Like, for example, I think Diogo Jota is involved in an important qualifier as well, and he played against Nottingham Forest.
And there's a couple of players who maybe Liverpool will benefit from not being involved. You've mentioned, I think, in one of your pieces that Thiago missed out on the Spain squad again, which, I mean, bizarre from a Spanish point of view, but for Liverpool, it's got to be a helpful tool in keeping a key player fresh heading into a pivotal point of the club season.
Yeah, I mean, I guess because Thiago is getting close to, he's 30 now, so maybe Spain are just trying to build for the future. But I think that will bode well for Liverpool. We saw even when James Milner retired from international football, he just had a new lease of life at Anfield. So with Thiago, Yeah, you could still he'll still might be involved in later squads, especially at the World Cup. But if he's not, then it's just a huge bonus for Liverpool because having him fit and having him uh, have such huge amounts of preparation for in between every international break is always going to be a bonus.
Yeah, and another key figure, of course, retired from international football, Joel Matip. So we'll have the two big guns fit for the run-in. For the rest of the international break, I'm sure Liverpool fans will just be watching from behind the sofas, making sure that there's no injuries. But as Ben points out, for the players and for a lot of the fans, even a lot of Liverpool fans, internationals are still some of the biggest games in football. That's not for us to judge the players, and it's something Klopp has to get used to. It's something we have to get used to. But I'm sure we'll all be very pleased for club football to be back, even if it has to be the early kickoff. We'll be back over the next few days, every morning, looking at more Liverpool talking points. Whether internationals will come into it again, we'll see. But we'll give you your fix of Liverpool content. Thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you soon.